The Whig Party has been largely forgotten today, but prior to the creation of the Republican Party in 1854, it was the main competitor to the Democratic Party. In Kentucky, the Whig Party dominated state politics, as it held the governor's mansion from 1836 to 1851. In 1848, support from prominent Kentuckians like John J. Crittenden proved crucial to the nomination and election of Zachary Taylor, a man who had himself been raised in Kentucky. Join us today for a talk with a researcher and editor who is leading the project to compile the letters of Zachary Taylor and Millard Fillmore, as we explore the pages of Kentucky history with Kentucky Chronicles. I'm Alan Fletcher, the Associate Editor of the Register of the Kentucky Historical Society and the new host of Kentucky Chronicles. Before we get to today's interview, I'd like to send a shout-out to the Kentucky Farm Bureau podcast, who recently interviewed our curator, Brandon Stevens, on the history of agriculture in the Commonwealth. During the interview, Brandon discussed the evolution of Kentucky farming practices and highlighted advancements that transformed Kentucky agriculture. Listen to episode 9 from their second season. The interest of commercial farmers in the 19th century also aligned with the interest of the Whig Party. Kentucky's Henry Clay, a founding Whig leader, was a progressive farmer who embraced innovations in agronomy and animal husbandry. Michael D. Cohen is the editor and project director of the Correspondence of Zachary Taylor and Millard Fillmore at American University. He holds a Ph.D. in history from Harvard University. He has published Reconstructing the Campus, Higher Education and the American Civil War. He previously worked on the James K. Polk Project at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where he served as editor. As part of this project, he helped oversee and edited the book James K. Polk and His Time, Essays at the Conclusion of the Polk Project. Daniel J. Burge, our previous host, has taken a new position at another institution. Before he left, Daniel recorded the first 3 episodes of Season 3. Here's his interview with Dr. Cohen.
So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we normally talk to folks who have published something with us, but I thought I would switch it up a bit today and talk more directly about our collections at KHS. For those who might not be familiar, could you tell us a little more about Zachary Taylor and his connection to Kentucky? How did KHS, if you know, wind up with several of his letters?
Certainly. Taylor lived most of his young life in Kentucky. He was technically born in Virginia. His parents had been planters in Eastern Virginia, rather successful farmers. They owned a lot of land and enslaved a large number of African Americans. But in 1784, when Zachary was born, they were in the process of moving to the area of Louisville. His father was a Revolutionary War veteran and had acquired some land there as a kind of reward for his Revolutionary service. So his father moved on ahead. His mother was on her way when she developed late into her pregnancy. So she stayed at a relative's in Orange County, Virginia, and gave birth to Zachary. Then when he was 8 months old, she and Zachary and his 2 brothers went on to Louisville. Then he spent most of his youth on this plantation, which came to be known as Springfield, just outside Louisville. And until he began his military career in 1808, that's where he spent most of his time. So naturally, the Kentucky Historical Society did a great job on finding some of his letters to develop this Zachary Taylor Papers collection. And also in 2 other collections related to other prominent Kentucky politicians, they collected correspondence that those men had with Taylor. One of them was Orlando Brown, whom Taylor eventually appointed as U.S. Commissioner of Indian Affairs when he was president. So we have these 3 collections at KHS that have Taylor letters either he wrote or received.
It's kind of sad that he wasn't born in Kentucky, because Kentucky could have at least sort of claimed him. We always talk, most people, when they come to Kentucky or they think about presidents in Kentucky, we have Abraham Lincoln, of course, but that's somewhat, truncated. He moves away at such a young age. So you have the birthplace still. But then it's really Henry Clay who most people think about. So I always tell people, if you're here, go to the Zachary Taylor National Cemetery, see some of that stuff, because it is interesting that he's the only one who ended up buried in Kentucky.
And ultimately, in 1848, when Taylor was nominated for president by the Whig Party, they were really choosing between those two Kentucky politicians, Taylor and Clay, as to who would be the nominee.
And that was one of the things when I was doing my own research, that was one of the things I was trying to flesh out. Did those two men have a relationship, or sort of how did that work? Because the Whigs here in Kentucky are not only prominent, they really do control so much of the state. It's one of those sort of interesting dynamics. But to shift gears just a little bit, can you tell our listeners a little bit about Papers Projects? For those who might not be familiar, most times we talk to individuals who are doing, an article, or they're working on a book project. What is a Papers Project? What are you all trying to do with the papers of Zachary Taylor and Millard Fillmore?
Yeah, certainly. I'm a historian. I'm also a documentary editor, which is a term that often confuses people because it sounds like I edit documentary films, but I'm not Ken Burns. It means we edit documents. We publish historical documents online and in print so that people can read the words of the people who lived through history and learn history from those original documents. I think that's really important so that in addition to reading the great work of historians who analyze these documents and synthesize them, it's something really special to be able to see and read the words of people like Zachary Taylor and people who we may not have heard of, who lived through these times from many different areas of society. So there are a lot of projects like this one, often called the Papers of blank or the Correspondence of blank, where we pick some individual, or as in my case, two individuals, Zachary Taylor and Millard Fillmore, and bring together their letters, or in some cases, all of the things that they wrote. We find everything that we can from either their entire lives, or in our case, from a decade leading up to and including their presidencies. And then we publish a selection of those, kind of the most important, interesting letters on a wide variety of topics so that people can read them and can easily access them online and in print, as I said. And this kind of is useful when it comes to presidents in two particular ways. One is, of course, presidents had a huge impact on American society and politics. So the decisions that Taylor made and Fillmore made when they were presidents in the late 1840s, early 1850s, had a big impact on the issues of slavery and the removal of Native Americans from the East and other political topics going on in that time. But also, the president by that time had come to be seen as sort of a representative of all the people. So a lot of people would write to the president to express their opinions about a wide variety of issues about what was going on in their lives. These included both native-born citizens and immigrants, old and young people, people in all professions, men and women, Native Americans and whites, and in some cases, African Americans, including those who were enslaved, would write directly to the president. So we end up with this kind of slice of American history through the president's papers that really shows off a much larger portion of society than you might expect from the papers of the person at the very top of the hierarchy.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it, too. I know with our own Civil War Governors of Kentucky project, what Chuck Welsko always points out is it's not really just about governors. It's really about all the Kentuckians, who are writing in and asking questions or petitioning the governors. I'm sure you sort of get that same flavor with presidents. It could just be an ordinary person writing in.
Sometimes the president would respond, which was exciting both for that person and for me, seeing how they reacted to these sort of common people's letters.
It's so different from today. If you write a letter to the president, you would never think you'd get a response, but getting one back must be, I don't know, that'd be really cool.
Yes, and I mean, they, from their marks on these letters, Taylor's, Fillmore's, and Polk's, I used to work on him, you can see that the presidents did actually read a large portion of these letters they received. And an interesting point is that the postage stamp had just been introduced at this time in 1847, the U.S. postage stamp. So still most mail was sent without a stamp. it was paid by the recipient, not the sender. So you didn't have to even pay for that postage to send a letter to the president.
I would imagine, and this is a little bit off the beaten path, but are there some relatively crazy letters that you just get sort of attached into these? Or are there people who just write, I don't know, asking for things that you wouldn't expect?
Yes, and people do ask for kind of odd things. And they're, like in Polk's case, like we had a letter from a Bostonian who sent him a gift of a salmon when he was in the White House, I guess to help advertise his wares. He was a fisherman. We got letters threatening the presidents by some opponents who usually chose not to write their names. We have some people who claim to be prophets of God who say that they have this prediction of some disaster that's going to happen. It's a wide variety, and some of them are surprising in less off the wall ways, such as when you get a letter from a woman to Millard Fillmore. This is before he was president, but as he's moving up that way and being considered as a vice presidential nominee, she says, "Well, I want you to give this friend of mine a job, and then when I am Mrs. Presidentess, I will give you a job." And it's unclear exactly what that means. She probably meant when she's first lady, theorizing that her husband could become president. But it's interesting to both think about the different meanings that could have had and to realize that there were some women who took an explicit political interest and thought that they could wield political power in a way that we often assume was limited entirely to men at the time.
That's a really good point. So to draw back to Fillmore and Taylor, I know your project deals with both of them, but for Taylor in particular, I know Fillmore will probably pop into this conversation as well. Why is it so challenging to find their papers, or what makes this particular project somewhat difficult? And to interject just a little bit of my own experience, one of the challenges for me when I was researching Zachary Taylor was the fact you did not know where his letters were going to be at. It was seemingly you'd go to an archive and I'd go, do you have any of, Zachary Taylor letters, or do you have, and you'd find them in random places. And I was wondering if is that one of the challenges, or what are some of the challenges for covering someone like Taylor?
Well, that's true. In some other presidents, it's a little easier to find their letters for a variety of reasons. For example, if you have someone like Washington or Lincoln or Jefferson, then they have large museums, large house museums usually, that have done a good job at collecting their letters and other documents. Taylor is the only president, as a student who has worked in our project pointed out to me, he's the only president who does not have a museum anywhere. So there hasn't been sort of one centralized location that's collected his papers. The Library of Congress has collected some, as they have with every president, but still most of them are, as you said, scattered around. One reason for that is how his life ended and what came after. And he died when he was president, unexpectedly. So it's not like he left office and then had a chance to gather everything together, put them in one place so that he could control how posterity would remember him. Also, he lived early in his life in Kentucky, but then later in his life in Baton Rouge. So at the time of the Civil War, and his home was in Confederate territory. His son was actually a Confederate general. So the Union troops, when they took over the area, were for the most part not too kind to this home of a former president. It was ransacked, and a lot of the material was either destroyed or scattered. However, some of the Union soldiers, recognizing that this was the home of a former U.S. president who was considered to be a firm Unionist, they took some of his papers and preserved them themselves, and eventually these made their way into places like the Kentucky Historical Society and historical societies and other private organizations, repositories, archives, and libraries around the country. So we've been able to contact them through a variety of web resources. As more catalogs have been put online, we're able to find out where these are, get in touch with them. And archivists and librarians are amazingly helpful in helping us track down what collections exactly have these documents, as you have been at KHS. And we've gotten digital copies of them from far and wide. We're continuing to find more. but that has been, as you say, a more more scattered effort than it would be for someone like Jefferson, whose papers are held in just a few, or the vast majority of whose papers are held in a few places.
That sort of leads me to my next question, which ties back directly to that. Do you think the lack of a papers project, or the ability for historians to access papers like the Taylor and Fillmore papers, has shaped historical understandings of his presidency, or has led to him being somewhat overlooked? I know for me personally, even when I started looking into Taylor more and more, what's out there, not that Wikipedia is a great source, but when you just look up individuals, it is, Taylor seems to, get the proverbial short end of the stick. He's not a successful president, or he's not ranked highly. And, people don't go, oh, you're researching Zachary Taylor. That's super exciting most times, or at least when I've talked about him, people are like, oh, I never really thought about that with him. Do you think that's shaped his understanding, and do you sort of hope that your project will enable historians to maybe rethink this really pivotal era in U.S. history?
I think there are a few reasons why not a lot of attention has been given to Taylor, and I agree with you that one of them is the absence of a papers project or some effort to get his words out there. There are, I believe now, including ours, now 16 presidents who have had these projects assembling in some form their letters or their papers more broadly to be published in print or online or both, or in some cases they put the images of the original manuscripts online. That's what they do with Theodore Roosevelt, for example. And if those documents are available, accessible, then more people are likely to use them, both teachers and students and the general public, and historians who are writing analyses of the period. And as a result, like if you read about the Compromise of 1850, which was this big national compromise over slavery that happened during Taylor's and Fillmore's presidencies, the books about them tend to say very little about Taylor and Fillmore, even though they were the presidents involved in these negotiations with Congress. The members of Congress who were involved, people like Henry Clay, you mentioned earlier, Daniel Webster, they have these papers projects. Their documents have been available for quite a while. So in part because they simply were more central to the congressional discussion, they were in Congress, but in part because their letters are available, they get much more attention in these books. The presidential documents just haven't been available. Another reason why someone like Taylor, in particular, isn't studied a lot is, well, the presidency at the time just wasn't as important an office as it is now. There was a lot more emphasis on Congress. Congress had a lot more power and had not yet delegated it to the presidency to the extent that it did in the 20th century and 21st. There are exceptions when you have like the Polk presidency or the Lincoln presidency. Both were wartime presidencies and led by men who chose to take on a lot more power than the president traditionally had. But those were the exceptions. People like Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, kind of the ones we've never heard of. They saw themselves as having a much more conscribed role. Taylor and Fillmore, in particular, as members of the Whig Party, they saw the presidency as a rather weak office. Some of the more surprising letters of Taylor's are the ones in which he says, my opinions as president don't matter. Like when he was running for president, he kept repeating, as people would ask him, what are your opinions on this issue and this issue? He'd say, I'm not going to share my opinions. Even if I were the president, my opinions would be irrelevant because it's Congress that makes decisions about that. And the president, for the most part, just signs their bills. In exceptional cases, he'll veto something, but they, at least in public, did not consider the presidency to be anywhere near as important as it is today. I'd say one more thing, though, just going back to the idea that this is not just about the presidents, that it is a loss to our understanding of history, even more so that we don't get the words of the people writing to the presidents and influenced by their presidential decisions, whether they be the male and female laborers who would write to the president about their opinions, or enslaved African Americans who were in many cases Taylor himself claimed ownership of them. He owned well over 100 people on his plantations. Or Native Americans who were being deprived of their land and writing directly to the president as to seek recourse for that. It's important that we get their words and we incorporate their perspectives into history. So when we're not using these papers attached to Taylor, Fillmore, and these other presidents, then we're missing out on them too.
There's such an expansive story, I think, that can be told with a lot of these different papers collections. I'm just thinking recently of Amy Greenberg's work on Mrs. Polk, and just stories that sometimes you don't center or you don't think about, and then you go, oh, okay, that's actually a really interesting take, because it just gives you a different perspective. And I know you could take that a lot of different ways, but there's just so much stuff out there that it really does help to publish that. Normally I ask our guests something to the extent of, what was the most interesting thing you found while doing research at the Kentucky Historical Society, but I thought I'd broaden this a bit and sort of get back to what you were just talking about. Is there a document or maybe documents that you found to be the most interesting or illuminating, or that you'd like to share with our listeners as you've been working on this project, or something that you're just like, oh, this was really interesting to come across, and I wish more people knew about this particular writer or this particular source?
Yes, I mean, there are more than I have time to discuss, but if I can focus on two, to start with one that is at the Kentucky Historical Society. As I said, some of Taylor's correspondence there is with Orlando Brown. And in 1848, as I said, Taylor was running for president, but he was reluctant to share his opinions on issues. He was also reluctant to run for the presidency itself. And he was a military man. He had spent over 40 years in the Army. He was a general by this time. And the other of his dual careers was being an absentee plantation owner and enslaver. So he didn't have experience in civil politics. And he actually was the first president who had not held civil political office before the presidency. He'd only been in the military. So even he considered that odd, and he wrote sometimes that he didn't think that a military officer should become president. We should have someone with a lot of civilian political experience. And one letter in which he gets at similar issues is in 1848 in March. He writes to Orlando Brown about an invitation he had gotten from the Kentucky legislature. They had asked him, he was on leave from the Army. He'd been serving in Mexico, and now he was back at home in Louisiana. So they asked him if he would come visit Frankfort and meet the legislators. And he wrote back this very nostalgic letter about how fondly he remembered his time in Kentucky, how he would love to see a lot of these people. Some of them he knew from very early in his life, others were new to him. But he said he was in this kind of odd transition between a military and a political career. He was still in the Army, and he remained so almost until a month before he took office after the election. So he said, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to visit a legislature in what might appear to be a campaign stop when I'm still an active military officer. And his commander-in-chief was a member of the opposite party, James K. Polk. So he didn't mention that part, but it was definitely in the background. So he didn't think this was appropriate. He had to stay at home in Louisiana and do the family responsibilities that he officially was on leave to do. So it's interesting sort of reading that sort of new territory that he's navigating. Another letter that I find really fascinating is actually connected with another Kentuckian. Zachary Taylor's son-in-law was a man named Jefferson Davis. And they had kind of a complicated relationship. But by the time Taylor was running for president, they were very close and they corresponded a great deal. And in 1847, Taylor wrote several letters to Davis in which he discussed the issue of slavery and the potential of the Union even breaking up over it. And in one of these letters in August 1847 to Davis, the future president wrote that he really hoped people would calm down, settle down, and discuss this issue of slavery and whether they should expand slavery into new areas. Discuss it in a diplomatic and peaceful way. He said people tend to lose their minds when they get to this controversial topic. He said he hopes that happens and they find some compromise that all people, by which he meant all white men, could agree on. And but he said maybe that won't happen. He said if these northern anti-slavery people become too strident in their views, attack us too much, then we as Southerners will need to break up the Union by arms if necessary. He says he hopes it doesn't come to that, but he's actually saying that we may have to break up the Union, fight a war against the United States government, to the man who eventually became the president of the Confederacy. And since Taylor is often seen as a Southerner, yes, but a very pro-Union president who was willing to work with Northern politicians, anti-slavery politicians, and that's true. It's interesting seeing this kind of surprising attitude before he was president and tracing how he became more firmly unionist over time once he entered the White House.
To get back to the first example, it's always fascinating to me. I was working on a project on the old state capitol here in Frankfort. How many Whig politicians? Taylor had some restraint apparently, because Winfield Scott would just happen to stroll into Frankfort, right in election season. It's like 1852, he's making a tour, and it's not a campaign stop per se, but Winfield Scott he's just happening to roll into town. William Henry Harrison also just sort of happens to stop by in Kentucky right around campaign, where you would typically more modern times have a campaign season. So it's fascinating to me that sort of that hesitancy to actually campaign, but at the same time, they still knew what states they needed to win in order to win elections, and that sort of strategic thinking. But that's a very interesting letter as well to Davis.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up those other military politicians. I mean, all three of those men, Harrison, Scott, and Taylor, did go from military to political careers. Harrison and Scott were different in that they made it clear that they wanted to be politicians and become president, whereas Taylor wrote over and over that he did not. People can debate how honest he was toward the end of that, and some may think that he was, to some extent, sort of doing that to appear humble, but he never said that he wanted to be president. He made it clear that he was different in that regard from those contemporaries.
There's a part of me that thinks it's almost beneficial in that day and age to be able to do that, in the sense that Winfield Scott, military hero, I mean, he has all the things that you think he'd do better than Taylor in that election. I know there's a lot of different circumstances, but that idea that, well, Scott's just always seeking the presidency and that's his lifetime goal, I do think that mid-19th century politics can sort of come back to haunt you a little bit. So looking at the big picture, for listeners or for those who might not be as familiar with the Presidential Papers Project or just a Papers Project in general, what is sort of the ultimate goal of this? What are you hoping to do with it? Can you give us, and I know this is a really broad question, but sort of a sense of the timeline? I mean, what are you all doing sort of on a regular basis, and what are you producing as part of this project?
That's a great question. And before I forget, I'll put in a plug here, direct people to our website, taylorandfillmore.org, where we have a lot of the outlines of the type of work that we do at our project, and a blog in which I discuss the different stages of work and kind of draw some connections between Taylor and Fillmore's time and debates going on today. But our project is a 12-year project. We're publishing 3 print and digital volumes with letters covering what Taylor and Fillmore wrote and received from 1844 to 1853. So this is the decade, as I said earlier, leading up to and including their presidencies. What we do is, the first stage is finding the letters. So, and we discussed that a little before, contacting archivists, librarians all over, and in some cases, they'll go to the actual letters and make digital copies for us. In others, my colleague or I will travel to repositories around the country to locate these ourselves. That's especially important with larger repositories such as the Library of Congress and the National Archives, where they have just such a huge collection of government documents, and you have to page through a lot of them before you find the particular ones that are Taylor Fillmore letters. But then once we have these letters, then we select a subset of them, the ones that we think most useful to historians, teachers, students, and we transcribe those. We type them up, which it sounds very simple, but given how diverse and simply bad 19th century handwriting could be, that is something of a challenge. And we do several stages of proofreading to make sure we have these texts exactly accurate. Then we annotate them. Because if someone's reading these letters, even if we have it nicely typed up and you don't have to deal with the handwriting, there'll be all kinds of people mentioned in them and events and institutions mentioned in them that people today just won't recognize. And I mean, some are especially annoying. Like, of course, you'll occasionally come across a reference to Mr. Smith. Well, how many thousand Mr. Smiths were there? Taylor had an annoying habit of referring to a couple of his relatives as Mr. and Mrs. Taylor. Well, there were a lot of Mr. and Mrs. Taylors. So we have footnotes in which we tell people who these historical actors are and give very short biographies of them. I mean, that includes people who may be only referred to by a first name, such as those who were enslaved on Taylor's plantations and weren't given the dignity of having full names. Taylor would rarely even refer to them by first names, but we identify them whenever we possibly can. So we have these annotated transcriptions. We publish them in print and online. We expect that the first volume of the 3 will be published simultaneously in print and online in 2026. And between then and around 2000, probably 33 or 4, we'll publish volumes 2 and 3. So that these documents, about 1,100 of them in total, will be easily accessible and people can start using them in classrooms and when historians write their books, they can rely on these, and anyone can just read these original words. Actually, on our website, we have a teaching guide that we already put up with a few of the documents sort of pre-publication. We've put them up along with a teaching guide so that high school classes can use them to learn about the annexation of Texas, which was happening during this time, using letters that Fillmore wrote and received about the issue.
I always try to impress upon listeners, I know for me it's been a learning experience, how far out these things have to be planned. I know with researchers doing just a regular monograph, it can take years and years and years. But these papers projects are also just hugely helpful to researchers, but there's a lot that's involved. I mean, you mentioned the handwriting, and I hope when the episode, this podcast drops, we can maybe show, a couple examples, because until you've sat in that archive or you've gone through, I remember I was looking at, I think it was John J. Crittenden. There was somebody who just had absolutely atrocious handwriting. And after a few hours of sitting through that, I mean, what you all are doing to transcribe a lot of those is really, really helpful because it saves researchers so much time.
Well, thank you. And I have to give a lot of the credit to the students who work with us. And on my project, Amy Larrabee-Coates and I are the 2 editors of the project, but we've had consultants who have helped us out and also many students from American University here and St. Olaf College. And we have one student currently at Yale University who is working with us. And they do a lot of the work with the initial transcriptions of these letters. And then Amy and I go through them and proofread them multiple times so that we end up with a high quality final document. But so much of the work is done by the students. That really makes this effort possible.
I always get a chuckle because in the office next to ours is CWGK, and they will always, they'll be over there debating one word or a signature and sort of trying to figure out, okay, what is this name on this document, or what does this mean? And they'll have these debates. Come look at this, and it's such an interesting process.
I've heard some people say that the defining question of documentary editing is that a period or is it a comma? And I don't know that I call it the defining question, but it is one of the types of questions that we are constantly asking ourselves. Also, you mentioned sort of how much like how much labor is involved in these things, like including the students. We've been on this project since 2020, and we've already had, I think, 25 people working on the project, contributing to it, as all these students have joined us. My previous project, the Correspondence James K. Polk, over its lifetime, we had 43 people who were officially working for the project, and lots more helped out in some way or other. And the project itself lasted for 61 years, which is longer than Polk lived. So this can take a lot of time. Ours is much more confined. We're just covering a 10-year period, not the whole life. So we're able to do this in 12 years. But these are very intensive projects involving a lot of people, from students to seasoned professional historians.
How many volumes did the James K. Polk papers end up being?
14 volumes.
Okay.
And that covered his entire 53-year lifetime.
I can't imagine individuals working on these two-term presidents, but also individuals who just had, Thomas Jefferson, like, I got to write letters all the time.
Yes. Well, the Jefferson Project, I believe, began in 1943 and is still going, because it's, again, you say 2 terms. It's not just his presidency. It's his entire life. And Jefferson, of course, was involved in so much else before and after his presidency, from the Declaration of Independence to founding the University of Virginia. So, there are, it's great that they are making these documents available, and it's humbling to see how much someone like Jefferson, or for that matter, Taylor or Fillmore, wrote.
I know. It sometimes makes me appreciate the fact that we have email, but it also makes me wish sometimes that, I had better handwriting and just could, rattle off a note and just send it off, because there is something about that I think that's kind of cool. But I'm going to bring this to a close. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope our listeners will enjoy this, and I know I learned a lot from talking about your project.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been really great talking with you.
Like the Civil War governors of Kentucky, the compilation of the papers of Zachary Taylor and Millard Fillmore will enable researchers to approach the decades of the 1840s and 1850s from new perspectives. The Kentucky Historical Society proudly holds several letters from Zachary Taylor, which can be viewed by researchers. While Taylor was not born in Kentucky, he is buried at the Zachary Taylor National Cemetery in Louisville. We hope that future generations will take the time to learn more about the 12th President of the United States and how he shaped the course of American history. This brings another episode to a close. I would like to thank our guest, Michael D. Cohen, for talking with Daniel today. Our show is recorded and edited by Gregory Hardison. Thanks to Dr. Stephanie Lang for your support and guidance. Our theme music is used courtesy of Pixabay. To learn more about our publication of The Register, or to learn more about our Research Fellows program, please visit our website, history.ky.gov. If you have enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe. It really helps us know how we are doing. You can also help us build a following by telling your friends to subscribe.